Morning, everyone. So we are here over at HQ Raleigh, and we are going to live stream our Tech Tuesday this morning in an effort to help everyone with social distancing, but also keeping you the content that you deserve and want to know. We're here with Erin this morning, and we're going to talk about how to deal with difficult people. So follow along, listen in, you can type in your comments, and we'll make sure to share them with Erin if you have any today. Thanks, Erin, for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate you having me. All right, guys, today we're going to talk a little bit about how to deal with difficult people. I'm just going to jump on in if you don't mind, and feel free to share your questions, like Jennifer said, if you have any while we're live streaming. All right, so first of all, I want to talk to you a little bit of our plan of attack, what I'm going to go through this morning. First, we're going to define the word difficult, get us all on the same page. Next, we're going to describe what does difficult people mean. I'm sure that when you were thinking about this presentation this morning, you were kind of thinking of a certain person or a certain situation that's happened to you maybe recently in your professional or your personal life. So we're going to kind of put those into four different categories of difficult people and go from there. Next, we're going to talk about a few personal stories of mine. I think sometimes the easiest way for us to understand a situation is for us to hear someone else's story to better understand what they might be talking about. And then fourthly, we're going to talk about actionable measures. Whenever I'm giving presentations or talking about different topics with people, I like to actually give them actionable measures. I've given you all this information. What is it that you can do with it to move forward and use it in your life, in your professional world or your personal world? And by the way, you can see here, there's two guys here. One has his arms wrapped around the other, giving him a noogie. Probably not the way to deal with difficult people, just saying. All right, so let's go ahead and define the word difficult and get us all in the same place. So when I was putting this presentation together, I went to Google and looked up the word difficult. There's all kinds of words out there to describe the word difficult, and I'm going to share a few of those with you. So you've got the word troublesome, tiresome, trying, exasperating, demanding, contrary, pig-headed, stubborn. I'm sure we don't have anyone that is defined by any of these words. Fussy, bullheaded, hypercritical. And then you've got the words. Uncooperative, unaccommodating, unhelpful, unmanageable, and then my favorite, obstreperous. I have never heard of this word before, so I wanted to take this moment to give you your lesson of the day. Here's your new word. You can go into your vocabulary. Difficult, obstreperous, synonyms for one another. You're welcome. All right, so I wanted to start out with a story I call the Pickle Story. So in my household, it's one of those stories where it's kind of the inside joke that my husband and I have between the two of us. So a number of years ago, right after my son was born, and actually due to the coronavirus and schools being canceled, my son is here today with us. He's there he is on the floor with his iPad. He had to come to work with mom today. But this story is really all about him. He was about 2 weeks old, and my husband was at home with me on paternity leave, and we were going to have lunch, but we didn't have any pickles. So I asked my husband, I said, why don't you go to the grocery store and get some pickles? He said, okay, no problem. He goes to the grocery store. So I'm sitting there holding my son. His name is Rainy for short, and I get a text. The text says, hey babe, what kind of pickles do you want? Let me paint the picture a little farther for you. Rainy is crying hysterically. I'm probably covered with some version of vomit, poo, snot. I know you got all these descriptors, right? But I want you to understand my state of mind. I hadn't been sleeping because at night he preferred to cry rather than sleep. So I'm probably not in the best emotional frame of mind. Extremely tired. And so my text back to him was, just get some pickles. Well, he took a picture similar to this one at the grocery store. Except for his picture. I took this picture a few days ago at our local grocery store. You can see all the options there. You can see there's bread and butter. There's original, there's sweet gherkin, there's sour, there's dills, there's jalapeno dills, there's some kind of Talk of Texas, crisp okra pickles, there's Vlasic, there's Mount Olive, there's Wickles. You can see there's lots of options, and there's even more than this if you go to the grocery store. So my husband's standing there at the grocery store, probably with his arms out, feeling exasperated, knowing that his wife is at home, sleep deprived, not happy, and he has no idea what kind of pickles to get me. So he shoots me a text with a picture similar to this and says, "What kind do you want?" Now again, on the other end of the phone, I have a screaming baby. So my text back to him was, "Just buy some pickles." To me, it was just a simple request, babe. Just go to the grocery store, buy some pickles, and then bring them home so we can eat lunch. I don't understand why this is so complicated. That was kind of my frame of mind. Why are you being so difficult, honey? And then, of course, he's standing there in the aisle at the grocery store looking at all these pickle options going, why can't she just tell me what she wants? Why can't she just tell me what she needs? So both of us are really, really frustrated because we both feel like we're being clear. We both feel like we're being rational. So why don't I tell you this story? Perspective. Because in this story, I'm sitting there thinking, I'm being rational, I'm being logical, I'm being reasonable. Why can't John, my husband, just buy me some pickles? He's at the grocery store thinking, I'm being rational, logical, and reasonable. Why can't she just tell me what she wants? So we're both being difficult, right? So in other words, when you're in that situation, it doesn't matter what situation it is, it doesn't matter with who. Both sides feel in that moment when things start to get frustrating, when things start to get difficult, one party does not get why you don't get their side. Both parties feel like the other is being difficult. So another reason I shared this story with you is because I just wanted to paint the picture. Everyone's difficult. Everyone can be difficult at some point. You know, it's not one thing that only a certain few people, have. Not just one certain group of people are difficult. Everyone can be difficult. But that's not what we're talking about in today's presentation. What we're talking about in today's presentation are people who are habitually difficult. Not your one-off situation where you're difficult today because you got frustrated. We're talking about those people who 99% of the time can be difficult. And so what I did is I classified those four, I put it into four categories, put together four categories. And when I was kind of researching and putting this presentation together, I saw where some folks describe difficult people in 8 different ways. Some people describe difficult people in 2 kinds of ways, some in 1 way. There are so many different ways you can describe difficult people. But I decided to go along with 4 different categories. So here's what they are. You've got your downers, and I'm going to go into some more description in a few minutes. You got your downers, your better thans, your passives, and your blamers. So those are the 4 categories that I've selected to talk about difficult people today. So first, let's talk a little bit about downers. You'll notice that the picture on the right side of the screen is kind of the opposite of the downer mentality. You've got a glass half full of water, half full of air. So technically, the glass is always full. But a downer is the kind of person where nothing is ever good enough. They typically have a little bit of what you would call attitude. And they can be your negative Nancy's, your Debbie Downers. So this is your description of who the downer personalities are, the downer difficult people. And I'm going to come back to them in a few minutes, but I'm going to go ahead and go through the other 3 types too. So next you have your better thans. So what would be the opposite of a better than? Look in the mirror, that's your competition. You're not trying to one up or be better than anybody else, because really in this life, that person in the mirror should be your only competition. So what are some descriptors of better thans? Someone who knows it all. We all know someone like that. The one-uppers. Doesn't matter what you talk about, how excited you are, what you have accomplished. Somehow that person has done more and been better and been more successful than you, the one-uppers. And then you've got the show-offs. Those folks who are just so proud of themselves that they have to find ways to show it off. So those are your folks that fall into the better than category. Now let's move on to the passives. The passives are a group of people that sometimes we forget about, I think. Passives are your pushovers, your yes men, yes women, and those people that are overworked and don't follow through. So let's go over to the picture on the right side real quick. Learn to say no. We have limits to our time, our energy, and our interest. These passive folks typically have a struggle with figuring out how to say no. And sometimes, like the third bullet says, overworked and don't follow through. Oftentimes, passives continue to be taken advantage of and take on so much work that they eventually get to a point where they're overworked and then end up not following through and not producing like they used to. And we're going to talk a little bit about that a little later in the presentation. And then the fourth category are blamers. So the opposite of what a blamer would do would be that quote on the right, taking responsibility for our actions is much harder than finding someone or something to blame. So what are blamers? How do we describe blamers? They're your passive-aggressive folks. Those are the folks that always have an excuse. They're usually not accountable. They don't take responsibility for anything. They readily look for someone or something to blame. It's not their fault. And then lastly, a good definition of the blamers are those that see themselves in their life, in their world, as the victim. Everything happens to them and no one else. Poor me. It's typically the thought process of a blamer. All right, so now that we've kind of gone through a definition, description of those four categories of difficult people, let's go ahead and dig in a little farther. And before I do, let me grab a sip of water. Okay, so downers. I'm going to have a black screen up there for just a moment while I tell a quick story. So a number of years ago, I used to work at a gym. I was a school teacher during the day, by day, and then at night, by night, I was working at a gym. The details of the job, I loved the job. You know, I was responsible for answering the phone, for checking folks in, taking payment, and folding towels. It was an easy job. It was one that I loved. I got to be in front of people. It was just really, really an enjoyable time in the evenings, being able to socialize with folks. And I worked with this one woman, let's call her Susie to protect her identity. And Susie was what I would consider one of those Debbie Downer types. She always had a complaint. Nothing was ever good enough. I don't like my chair, it's uncomfortable. Look at the sun rising, it's not rising fast enough. You know, I don't like the way that the members come in and talk to me. You know, my boss said something to me the other day, and I just don't like the way that he was standing when he was saying it to me. I work really hard, and no one ever says thank you. And so it was really hard to work with her. I only worked with her a few times, but it was just really hard because everything that she said was negative. And almost everything she said was a complaint. But over time, and as I reflect back on it, what I realized about Susie is that what Susie was doing was connecting. Complaining was her connection to the world. It's how she was actually becoming part of other people's lives. I know it sounds crazy, you know. You would think to yourself, doesn't she have anything better to do than complain? But that's what she saw as her connection to people. If she started complaining or saying negative things, then somehow that ignited conversations with other people. It was her way of connecting. It was her way of being social. It was her way of being accepted. And then also, another story really quickly, I have someone in my own personal life who is a complainer. Every time we talk on the phone, she's complaining. And usually about how hard she's working. I'm so busy all the time. You just don't understand, Erin, how busy I am. I'm working so hard. I have this to do and this to do, and nobody can do it as good as me. And what I've realized over time about this person is complaints to her are bragging. What she's doing is she's complaining, telling me about how hard she's been working. That's her way of bragging on herself. Because what's happening is somewhere along the way, she's not being validated for her hard work. And so she's feeling the need to validate herself. And she does that through bragging. And then another thing to talk about with downers, their internal voice. And think about this for a minute. If their external voice is very negative and they complain often, don't you imagine that their internal voice, that little voice inside their head that talks to them, the chatter that goes on in all of our heads all the time, don't you think that it's probably negative too? So I can imagine that someone who falls into the downer category probably is saying to themselves, what's wrong with you? You're not good enough. And probably has some pretty negative internal conversation, pretty negative internal dialogue. This is a picture that I found that I think likely describes what downers feel like at home. When they're not in public, when they're not complaining. This is probably the conversation that's going on in their head. You can see a little boy looking in the mirror yelling. That's probably what's going on inside a downer's head. And oftentimes, they're complaining out loud so that they can actually be validated. They can escape that internal voice just for a few minutes. And then lastly, about downers, what they really want, they want to feel valued. They want to feel appreciated. So like I mentioned before, complaining is connection. My friend Susie, who worked at the gym, she just wanted to feel valued and appreciated, right? So she complained for connection, hoping that connection with someone would bring about some kind of value. She would feel like she's having a valuable conversation, a valuable connection. It may sound crazy to you, but that's really what she's going for there. And then my family member, bragging. Like I mentioned before, she's just validating herself. That's all she's really doing. She's bragging, she's complaining and bragging and validating herself. So, actionable measures. If you have someone in your workplace or someone in your personal life who is what you would consider a downer, here is what you can do. One suggestion I have is, maybe it's in the workplace, and maybe this would probably work for personal life too. Have an impromptu meeting with them. And for goodness sake, let it be an upbeat meeting. When you tell them that you want to have a meeting or you want to go to lunch, be upbeat. Let them know that you want to talk to them and get their ideas about something that they're successful at, something that they do really well. Tell them that you want to discuss their ideas about that thing, whatever it is. Don't say, we need to talk, because, oh my gosh, have you ever heard, we need to talk from someone? What is the very first thing that you think of when someone says, we need to talk? Oh my God, what have I done wrong? Are they going to be mad at me about something? Don't say that. Just tell them what you want to do. Hey, I just want to have an impromptu lunch. Just wanted to get your ideas about whatever it is they do really well. All right? So that's one of the first things that you can do. And then during that lunch, during that meeting, during even phone call, if a phone call is appropriate for the person you're talking to, get their input. Maybe the thing that they do really well, Let them have input on how to make that thing better, how to help other people be better doing that thing. Let them be part of the solution for something. And that'll do a couple of things. It'll make them feel valued, but it'll also validate them in some area where they're very successful already. And then also routine communication. Build that into your relationship with this person. Again, this is for professional or for personal. You want to make sure that you are giving that person what they need. It's kind of like their love language. They want to be valued. They want to be appreciated. They want validation. And by the way, everybody wants that. So build that in. The frequency, you have to figure out what that is. Is that every day? Is that every week? Is that once a month? I don't know. I can't answer that for you. You have to do what feels good for you and that person. But let them know you see them. Let them know you appreciate them. And build that into your relationship with them. All right, let's go to better thans. So let me start on better thans with a quick story. So just recently, I went to coffee with another person who works in the same field as me. We had a mutual friend, and they introduced us, and we went for coffee. Let's call this person Sam. And Sam and I met for coffee, and during the first 15 minutes or so, we talked about the normal stuff, a little bit about the weather, a little bit about our families, a little bit about what we've been doing, with work, the things we're excited about, the things that are coming up. But for the last, 45 minutes of our coffee date, it was pretty much all about Sam. All about how Sam's approach to what he does is better than anyone else's. And how the way that he works with his clients is far better than anyone else out there. He talked a lot about how much money he was making and how much more he was going to be making this year, and how he is just far superior to others in his world. And about 20 minutes into hearing him talk about these things, I was kind of wondering, do I cut him off? Do I try to ask other questions, or do I just sit back and listen? So I decided in that moment that I was just going to sit back and listen and learn. The things that I learned weren't the things that I anticipated learning from the coffee date, but I learned a lot. And what was really going on for Sam, if we really want to dig in under the surface, is Sam was trying to compensate for likely in his past he's been minimized, dismissed in some way, whether that been when he was an adolescent, whether that be in a young adulthood, maybe currently in some other way in his life. He's being minimized and dismissed. So how does he compensate for it? He compensates for it by being better than everyone else. At least that's what he says he is, because that makes him feel better. Much like the picture that I showed earlier for the negative Nancy, the complainers, this is likely how Sam felt inside his own head. He feels sad. He just wants to hide because he's dealing with that dismissal that he's felt for so long, for whatever reason that may have been. That is oftentimes the reason why people feel the need to be show-offs, to be know-it-alls, right? To be better than everyone else. So what's really going on in their mind? What's really going on for someone who's trying to be better than them, who's trying to show that they know it all, is someone who is desperately seeking attention, seeking validation, approval, value. Basically what they're doing by their behaviors and being better than everyone else, being a know-it-all, and being a show-off, they're basically saying, hey, look at me, in whatever it is they're doing. Because they're at this point, they're desperate. They just want to be approved of and want other people to see their value, and they don't know any other way to do it. So this is what they do. They're continuously looking for a chance to shine, hoping that every day when they show up as the the better than self that they've come to practice, that they're going to have that chance to shine. So, what can you do? So whether you're their employer or whether this is someone in your personal life, here's what you can do. Call them on their know-it-allness. Call them on their better-than-ness. Call them on it. And what do I mean by that? So what I mean by that is they want to be seen, let them. So what can you do? Have them to share with you. Have them to share with you why they're better than everyone else. Have them to put something together to teach others. Because what it does a couple of things, right? It allows them a forum to shine. It allows them an opportunity to put something together in a way that's not frustrating. Because oftentimes when someone says, I'm better than everybody else, or I'm the know-it-all, it's really frustrating to listen to them, right? But if you give them the opportunity, maybe they put together a lunch and learn for your colleagues at work about something that they feel they know everything about, right? Or maybe it's a friend who feels that they're better than everyone else at something. Have them put something together for you, or sit down and have an in-depth conversation with them about it. Let them share what they know. You know, let them shine. Let them be validated. And when they do this, that is if you do this in a professional setting, help them to succeed. I'm not talking about call them on it and make this be a learning moment for them where they realize they don't know it all, or they aren't better than everybody else. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about a potentially embarrassing situation for them. I'm talking about you helping them put something together so that they will succeed at it, so that it'll build them up and help them to feel, help them to shine, help them to feel accomplished. Okay? So that's something that you can do with the better thans. All right, moving on to passives. Sip of water while we're looking at the black screen. All right, quick story for passives. So years ago, I had a colleague named Sean, not his real name. I had a colleague named Sean, and Sean was the yes man in the office. Everyone went to Sean because Sean delivered. He always said yes. He never said no. He got the job done. Everybody loved him, right? So over the months and over the years, the projects, the requests, were originally right there in his wheelhouse. So he was able to chug them out just like this, right? But as time went on, he started to struggle because the projects and the efforts became farther and farther outside of his wheelhouse. And so he had to spend longer on them and do more research and put in more effort. So that over time, like I mentioned way back at the beginning of this presentation, he became overworked and frustrated. And then he began not to deliver. And so then his reputation as the yes man who always delivers became the yes man who doesn't deliver. So Sean talked to me a little bit, and he's like, Erin, what do I do? How do I deal with this? I don't want to continue this reputation of not delivering. What can I do? And I said, Sean, well, first of all, we got to deal with what's really going on here. You've got to learn how to say no. So what we were really doing is dealing with his low confidence. He didn't have enough confidence to say no. Why didn't he have enough confidence to say no? Because he was afraid of the judgment from others. He was afraid people were going to think badly of him. So he just didn't want the embarrassment. He didn't want the judgment. He didn't want anyone, because really all he wanted was for people to like him. And where does that come from? Because that's something that takes years to build up, low confidence, right? We're not born with low confidence. So was it from childhood? Was he bullied? Was he made fun of? I don't know, right? Or was it something in young adulthood where something embarrassing happened? So embarrassing that it shattered his confidence that he had. I don't know, but something happened that took his confidence way down to the point where he wasn't able to say no. So that's one thing that we started to work on together. So what do? Confidence. Sean and I started working on confidence together. At lunchtime, we'd go to lunch and we would build up his confidence. How did I do that with him? We just role played. Initially, we just role played. I would just talk to him about a project and saying, Sean, I need you to work on this for me. Okay, Aaron. No! Don't say okay, Aaron. He learned ways, we talked through ways for him to say no, or at least to give him time to figure out if he had time to do it. So we worked through ways for him to respond to other people, so that at least he could buy some time, which is the second piece, to figure out and look at his calendar with everything else that he had going on. Could he say yes? Or did he have a reason to say no? So we worked on some time management techniques. We looked at his calendar, we looked at my calendar, we looked at the blocking that I had going on in my calendar and how I managed my days, even how I managed my personal life. We looked at both so that he could kind of see what I did. Not that what I did was perfect, but it kind of helped him to understand how I make things happen so that I actually am meeting my goals in my professional world and in my personal world. And then lastly, problem solving. Now, if there's one thing that I've heard from managers and corporate leaders about millennials, and I'm not ripping on millennials because I'm one myself, but if there's one thing I've heard the most, it's problem solving. That millennials don't know how to problem solve. All they want to do is come to you with a problem, not with a solution. And so that's what Sean and I worked on. Also, we worked on problem solving. You know, for example, if you have 6 things going on, 6 different projects, you know, maybe there's, you know, a part of number 1 that needs to happen first, and then a piece of number 6 that needs to happen next. And then maybe you need to go back to Susie or whoever assigned number 3 to you and say, hey, we need to delay this for a week if possible, so that the other things that had earlier deadlines could be reached. You know, how to move things around, how to problem solve in your own work world, or in your own personal world for that matter. So those are some things that you can do with passives. And then lastly, blamers. Now, of all 4 categories, blamers are probably the category that brings about the most frustration, the most emotion, the most heart going fast and just shaking from other people not knowing how to deal with blamers. At least that's been my experience. So, and I don't think I even need to come up with a story for blamers, because I think we can all think of someone in our personal or professional lives who is that person who is always the victim, who can't take responsibility, who always is looking for someone else to place the blame when things go wrong. So let's talk a little bit about blamers. Where do blamers come from? Like mentally, where are they coming from? Why do they feel the need to blame? Because they're afraid. Fear is what drives blamers. The fear that you are going to figure them out and discover that they aren't enough. Because that's their internal language already. The blamer is always in fear that they're not enough. Whatever that enough is, not experienced enough, not pretty enough, not tall enough, not dedicated enough, whatever their enough statement is. Blamers typically live in fear, and they lash out by blaming other people. Because what that does is whenever blamers get into that situation where they have to act, when it's their time to rise, their time to be accountable or take responsibility for a situation, they blame. Because that feels better to them. Blaming someone else helps them to feel in control. Because if they take responsibility or accountability, then they feel helpless and out of control. But if they blame somebody else, oh, it's not my fault, it's her fault, or it's that situation's fault, somehow that gives them a chance to breathe. I know it sounds crazy, but that's how they feel. That's why they blame. And just like the quote said earlier in the presentation, it's hard to be accountable. It's easy to blame. So what can you do with blamers? So, not really a story. one person in my personal life. Love him to death. Love him to death. But there are points in time where he pulls out that victim card and he will not stop. Nobody understands me. Why do all bad things happen to me? Nobody ever understands what I go through. It's only me that ever has these problems. Just over and over and over again. But just recently, for whatever reason, I've had a few situations over the last number of months that have been really frustrating to me, where I've failed. Things haven't gone my way. And it's been really hurtful, and it's been difficult for me. And I've started to share those situations with him. You know, hey, I failed at this today. This happened. It was really disappointing. I'm really disappointed in myself. I'm disappointed in the situation. But here are the things that I've learned from it and how I'm going to move forward. And I've had a lot of those conversations with him lately. And you know what he told me the other day? He told me, he said, Erin, I want you to know that it feels really good to hear that you failed. He didn't mean it that way. What he meant was, it's good to hear that he's not the only one. Because blamers usually feel alone. And that's another reason why they cast blame. Because they feel isolated and alone. And when something ends up being their fault or they need to take responsibility, to them that makes them feel even more alone. So being able to push that blame off on somebody or something else helps them to feel better. So my friend told me, he said, Erin, it's so helpful when you tell me about your failures. It's so helpful when you share your vulnerability, where you screwed up, because it makes me feel better about when I fail and when I screw up, and it helps me to not feel so alone. So this is one of the very first things you can do with folks who are blamers, whether it be someone that you manage, whether it be a colleague, whether it be someone in your personal life. Share your failures. We all fail. Every one of us fails every day at something, right? You may as well own it and share it. There's nothing wrong with failure. It's what helps us to learn. So be vulnerable. Also, appreciate and validate. And wow, I think I've said this on every slide about every category of difficult people. But it's something we all need. Find the things that the blamers do well. We all have something that we do really, really well. Find that about the blamer and validate them. Let them know that you see them and appreciate them for their efforts. And lastly, be available. What does this mean? It means let that person know that you're available to talk to them anytime. Call you, email you, text you. Even if you're not available right then, you will make an arrangement to call them back or meet them some other time later to be available to have a conversation. Let them know you're there so they don't feel alone. All right. So to wrap it up, a few more things before we hit the end. Had to bring in some Snow White. There's Grumpy. All right, so we talked a little bit about the downers. These are the categories: the downers, the better thans, passives, and blamers. But I would imagine that some of you out there are saying, Erin, I'm thinking of a certain person in my world, professional or personal, who doesn't necessarily fit one of those topics, or maybe is a mix of a couple different ones. What do I do with them? You gave all these suggestions, but I don't know what to do with so-and-so because they're not necessarily a perfect fit for any of these categories. How should I deal with it? So, secondly, time. Give people time. Stop by people's desks and let them share and talk. Let them know that you're available to be there for them. Let your friends know that you're there. Sometimes if you don't even have a conversation, but you just reach out and say, please let me know if you have anything. I have a free 10 minutes on my calendar on Tuesday at 9. Give me a call. I'd love to hear from you. Give people time. Let them know you're there so they don't feel alone. And lastly, honestly, appreciation and validation, and I've said, this has to be the 5th time or so that I've said this, but what is the difference between appreciation and validation? So let's cover that really quickly so that we're clear. I'm going to pick on CEOs of companies for a minute. So maybe you have a CEO of a really large company, and they come and visit a satellite office, and they're walking through the hallway, and they stop by Cubes, and they say, I really appreciate your work here. I really appreciate your dedication. I really appreciate your longevity. I'm sure that all of those comments are sincere, but it's not validation. Validation is when your manager comes to you and says, hey, Aaron, I really appreciate the work that you did on such and such project. I appreciate your leadership and all the time that you put in. I know that we struggled with X, Y, Z on that project, and I really appreciate you pulling it through for us. Because validation is that way of letting people say, I see you, I notice you, and that's why I appreciate you. I notice what you're doing. I see what you're accomplishing. That's validation. And those are things that we all need. Empathy, time, appreciation, and validation. And that really comes to an end for our presentation today. So again, like Jennifer mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, please shoot me any questions that you have. I'm happy to answer them. Feel free to, after this presentation today, send it into the Facebook group, and I'll be sure to go in there and answer them. Or feel free to reach out to me at my email address, aaron@aarongallimore.com, or feel free to call me on my cell. It's my personal cell, by the way. I probably shouldn't be sharing that, and someone's probably going to get on to me for doing that, but here it is. It's your chance. Feel free to give me a call, shoot me a text, and then you can also see some postings that I make on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. So thank you all for joining, and I'll see you next time.